established names in Newtonia were involved there on that band. I wish we still had the wagon. That'd be great on that for sure. Okay, number 7 is a schoolhouse, and Larry or who was telling the story about the schoolhouse, about their separation? There, Nancy, do you remember that story?
When they built Midway, they sold the schoolhouse for $200, and it had my father and another man bought. Well, Charlie Neal, Kathy's, Sheehi's grandfather bought it, and they had white pine boards, 12 inches wide, and that kind of lumber,
Yeah.
without a knot in it.
But if you look at the picture, I think David told me this, there's a sidewalk running up to the front door. At recess, the girls had to play on one side of the sidewalk,
Right.
and the boys had to play on the other side, and we're not allowed to cross that sidewalk. So you'll see there are girls on one side and boys on the other.
Never cross over.
Never cross over.
Nancy's aunt that's walking down the middle too.
That's your
Right,
aunt?
This is Miss Nan,
Nan Williams.
right, depicted there, and she taught school there in the early years. In fact, how many of you here had Miss Nan as look at the age, all the ages here of some of the people. She taught a lot of years there in the Midway after that. This is Nancy Harris Harwell that with us here today, and that Miss Nan was your aunt. Was a sister to your mother, and the young man behind you there is Robert. Mr. Harvey, yeah. Robert and Nancy lived here in town for a long time, and we appreciate it. And then their son, Bruce.
A great nephew.
Yes, great nephew. There, Bruce Harwell too from Carthage. Bruce, glad to have you for sure. But we're real excited about that. It's a small image, but Sherry did a nice job taking a picture and putting a younger looking Miss Nan there in there. And you can imagine, if you notice too, I don't know if you did this on purpose, but she's not looking at the girls, she's watching the boys. They were the ones that kept going across the You know, we could probably use that philosophy today in our schools. Okay, the gunfight. Now this is David's here. The gunfight down here. David, tell us about this. This is your main.
There's a detail in this that you wouldn't find in any of the newspaper stories, because the newspaper stories were not written by somebody on the spot. The best witness to the gunshot was a 5 or 6-year-old boy who was standing about 100 feet beyond the store, holding a bag of vanilla cream candy. He was eating his candy as he walked along. He happened to be my cousin, Homer Weems, and well, first of all, I'll identify the people. The man on the left is Henry Estes. If you ever do crossword puzzles, you sometimes come to a Italian noble family, E-S-T-E. Now, the descendants of that family tell me that they were related. I don't know if that's right or not, but he was a color of the community, although he didn't live in Newtonia. He lived on a farm. The man right here is Ben Marshall. He lived in Newtonia. The black man is George Montgomery, and he was not a participant in the fighting, so he wasn't mentioned in the newspaper stories. But my cousin Homer Weems saw him run out and try to stop the fight. But it was at the Henry Estes had just come out of the general store. Now that was a general store. It had hardware. Toward the front, it had shelves with cloth, bolts of cloth, and at the back it also, or in the middle, it had groceries. I had 3 of my family that were there at that time. My mother had just brought the buggy in from the farm with some eggs. Back then, people took eggs, traded them in for whatever they were buying. And she just handed the eggs to a man named Jim Nimmo, who worked in the store. And Henry Estes, who was leaving the store, said to her, "Don't give the eggs to Jim Nimmo. He's used to having nails." And that was the last thing he said. And as he went out the door, there was an explosion. And my mother knew her horse was outside. She thought it was a firecracker, so she started to run out to grab her horse and calm it. And her father, who was the storekeeper, Joe Clark, called to her, "Don't go out there, that's a gunfight." Homer Wings told me that he was walking away when he heard the first explosion. He turned and he looked back and he saw George Montgomery run out from the drugstore and call to these men, start begging these men to stop the fight and quit shooting. They paid no attention to him at all, of course. People wonder why these two men were so eager to kill each other. Well, there are several stories about that, but a descendant of Henry Estes came to me a few years ago, and he said that his father had died, had never mentioned it. So he heard about the fight, so he went to his father's sisters, and they said, "We don't talk about that." So that kind of lends a little support to the idea that these two married men were involved with a woman. And that's what the fight was about, but we don't know for sure. Anyway, my cousin told me that Ben Marshall, the way he told it to me, he was the first to fall. And he raised up on one elbow and fired a final shot, and that shot brought Henry Estes down. My cousin Homer, as I said, was 5 or 6 years old. He was crying at that point, and he looked down and saw he had wet his pants. George Montgomery came over to him, picked him up, and carried him home. And this happened to be his home. This is the house built by the Miller family. The Miller family came to Newtonia in 1870 from Kentucky.